My name is Amanda Richardson, and at 28 years old, I finally learned what it means to stand up for yourself, even when the people you have to stand up to are your own parents. My whole life, I watched my mom and dad do everything they could for my brother Brandon while I struggled alone. They mortgaged our family home for his failed businesses, ignored my accomplishments, and then had the nerve to try to control my wedding day. But what happened next changed everything. And now they're the ones living with the shame. If you're watching this video right now, leave a comment telling me where you're from. If you've had to set boundaries with family members who undervalued you, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, this story might give you the courage you need. Growing up in Brookline, a middle-class suburb just outside Boston, I had what most people would superficially consider a normal childhood. Our house was a modest, two-story colonial with a wide front yard where neighborhood kids would gather to ride bikes in the summers. My dad worked in real estate, and my mom was a math teacher at the local middle school. But underneath that ordinary exterior was a dynamic that would shape my entire life. The first moment I realized something was different was on my 8th birthday. I had been begging for a special art set that cost $60. Even though my family said it was too expensive, they promised me a small party with cake. Just 3 weeks later, Brandon, who was 11 at the time, said he wanted to try soccer. Within days, my family spent $450 on brand new equipment without any hesitation. That night, I sat at the top of the stairs, listening to my mom tell my dad how they needed to tighten the budget that month. But Brandon had so much potential, and they needed to support him. As we got older, the pattern became more obvious. When Brandon joined the baseball team, my parents never missed a game. They would rearrange their work schedules, cancel plans, and drive for hours to tournaments. Meanwhile, when I won the regional science fair in 9th grade, neither of them attended the ceremony. Mom had to grade papers, and Dad was at Brandon's baseball practice. I got a quick congratulations when I got home, then the conversation immediately shifted to Brandon's upcoming game. My grandmother, Patricia, was the only one who saw me. On weekends, when I'd stay at her small apartment in the city, she would look through my sketchbooks filled with building designs and tell me, "Amanda, someday you're going to build something magnificent, and the whole world will see what I see in you." Those weekends with Grandma Patricia became my sanctuary, the one place where my achievements were celebrated instead of overlooked. By the time I entered high school, I had developed a self-reliance that most teenagers don't have. While other kids my age were asking their parents for help with homework or advice on social situations, I had learned to solve my problems on my own. I threw myself into academics and art, staying late after school to use the computers in the library since we only had one at home, which Brandon usually hogged for gaming. Brandon continued to become more entitled with each passing year. When he got a C in algebra, my parents hired a private tutor. When I struggled with chemistry, my mom suggested I just try harder. When Brandon wanted a car for his 16th birthday, my parents bought him a used Ford, even though it strained their finances. When my 16th birthday came around, I received a card with $20 inside and a reminder that I should be saving for college. My best friend Sarah was the first person outside the family to notice the difference. After spending a weekend at our house during sophomore year, she pulled me aside and asked, "Does it bother you that your parents treat Brandon so differently?" Until that moment, I had never voiced my feelings about it to anyone except my grandmother. Having someone else validate what I was experiencing made it both more real and more painful. I'll never forget my high school graduation night. I had been named valedictorian, maintaining a perfect 4.0 GPA while working weekends at the local bookstore. As I stood at the podium delivering my speech about perseverance and following dreams, I scanned the audience for my parents. They were there, but my mother was helping Brandon fix his tie, and my father was checking his phone, neither of them actually watching as I spoke. That same night, I overheard my father telling a family friend how Brandon had been accepted to Northwestern University with a partial athletic scholarship and how proud they were. My acceptance to Cornell with a partial academic scholarship had only gotten the brief mention when the letter arrived. My grandmother had been the one to take me out to celebrate, framing my acceptance letter which now hung in her apartment instead of our family home. I remember lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, surrounded by trophies and certificates that meant nothing to the people who should have cared the most. That's when I made a promise to myself that I would build a life where I was valued, even if it meant creating that life entirely on my own. As graduation summer passed, my parents threw themselves into preparing for Brandon to leave for college. New laptop, dorm supplies, clothes, shopping trips. Meanwhile, I picked up extra shifts at the bookstore, saving every penny and researching student loans. When Sarah asked if I was excited about Cornell, I remember telling her, I'm excited to finally be somewhere where the only person determining my worth will be me.
My college years at Cornell were defined by constant hustle and exhaustion. While most of my peers were enjoying the full college experience, I was juggling 3 part-time jobs alongside a full course load in architecture. I worked at the campus coffee shop in the mornings, the library in the afternoons, and did remote data entry work on weekends. Every hour not spent in class or working was dedicated to my studio projects. The contrast between Brandon's college experience and mine couldn't have been more stark. My parents had contributed $80,000 toward his education at Northwestern, covering what his partial scholarship didn't. For me, they offered a one-time gift of $1,000 my freshman year, saying that since I had chosen such an expensive school, I would need to figure out the rest myself. When winter break came that first year, I stayed in my dorm room rather than going home. I couldn't afford the plane ticket, and the thought of watching my parents fawn over Brandon, who would undoubtedly be treated like a returning hero, was too much to bear. I told them I had a job opportunity I couldn't pass up. In reality, I spent Christmas alone, eating ramen noodles and working ahead on next semester's projects. The loneliness was crushing during those first months. I'd watch other students video calling their families who asked about their classes, their friends, their well-being. When I called home, the conversations were brief and focused on practical matters. How are your grades? Are you managing your finances? Make sure you're not wasting money. Never, how are you feeling? Or we miss you. Or tell us about your favorite class. By junior year, I had settled into a routine of constant work and study. That spring, I took an elective course in sustainable design that changed everything. Not just because of the subject matter, which I fell in love with, but because that's where I met Matthew. He sat next to me on the first day, and we were paired for a semester-long project. From our very first conversation, something felt different with him. He listened when I spoke, actually listened in a way I had never experienced from anyone except my grandmother. Matthew came from a warm, supportive family that was everything mine wasn't. The first time he invited me to dinner at his parents' apartment in the city, I felt almost uncomfortable with how interested they were in my studies and my goals. His mother, Susan, asked detailed questions about my design projects. His father, Richard, wanted to know about my interest in sustainable architecture. They engaged with me as a person of value, something I had craved my entire life. During dessert, Susan mentioned how proud they were of Matthew's academic achievements, then immediately turned to me and said, "And Amanda, Matthew tells us you're at the top of your class while working multiple jobs. That's incredibly impressive." I almost started crying right there at their dinner table. It was the first time adults had acknowledged my hard work as something worthy of praise, rather than just expected. That same semester, I entered a prestigious design competition and won first place. The department chair personally congratulated me, and my work was featured in an architecture journal. I called my parents to share the news, only to have my mother cut the conversation short because they were headed to watch Brandon play in an intramural game. When I hung up the phone, Matthew found me crying in the studio. It was the first time I had ever let anyone see how deeply my parents' indifference affected me. "They'll never see me," I told him that night, "no matter what I achieve." "Then they're missing out on knowing an incredible person," he replied, wiping away my tears. "And that's their loss, not yours." Shortly after, we learned that Brandon had dropped out of Northwestern. After my parents had spent $80,000 on his education, he decided college wasn't for him. Rather than expressing disappointment, my parents immediately supported his decision. He had a brilliant business idea for a sports training app, and they were helping him get started. Meanwhile, I was eating one meal a day to save money for textbooks. The phone call where my mother excitedly told me about Brandon's entrepreneurial spirit while I sat in my dorm room surrounded by empty instant noodle containers was a turning point. "He's always been innovative," she gushed. "We're so excited to see where this takes him." "What about me?" I finally asked. "I'm graduating with honors next year. Doesn't that matter?" There was a pause. "Of course it matters, Amanda. We're proud of you too. It's just Brandon is taking such a big risk, and we want to support him through it." The message was clear. Brandon's failures warranted support, while my successes were expected and unremarkable. During my senior year, I threw myself even harder into my studies. I was determined to graduate not just with honors, but with opportunities that would prove my worth, even if only to myself. I applied for prestigious internships, entered more competitions, and worked on my thesis project like my life depended on it. Matthew was my constant source of support during this intense period. While other couples were going to parties and enjoying typical college experiences, he understood that I was fighting for something bigger than just good grades. I was fighting to prove that I deserved the success I was working so hard to achieve. The night before graduation, Matthew and I sat on the library steps, looking out over the campus. He asked, "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" I admitted, "I'm nervous about going home, even for just a few days before I start my job search." He said gently, "You know you don't have to prove anything to them anymore, right? You've already accomplished more than most people do in a lifetime." I knew that intellectually, but emotionally, I still carried that 8-year-old girl who just wanted her parents to be proud of her art set instead of dismissing it as too expensive. I graduated from Cornell with highest honors in architecture. My grandmother Patricia, Matthew, and his parents attended the ceremony, cheering loudly when my name was called. My parents arrived late, missed my walk across the stage, and left early because Brandon had a meeting with a potential investor for his app. The contrast between the genuine pride on Matthew's parents' faces and the distracted obligation on my own parents' faces cemented something I had known for years, but had been afraid to fully accept. I had to stop looking for validation from people who would never give it. That night, at a small celebration dinner that Matthew's parents insisted on hosting, Susan raised her glass. "To Amanda, for proving that hard work, talent, and determination can overcome any obstacle. We're honored to know you." As everyone toasted, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in my life, I was sitting at a table where I was truly seen and valued. It gave me a glimpse of what family could be and what I deserved from the people who claimed to love me.
Through a connection from one of my professors, I secured a position at Hartman & Associates, a prestigious architecture firm in Chicago specializing in sustainable design. It wasn't the highest-paying offer I received, but it was the one that aligned best with my passion. When I told my parents about the job, my father's first question was whether I would be making enough money to pay off my student loans. There was no congratulations, no pride, just practical concerns about finances. The irony that they had never once asked Brandon about his ability to repay them for his education wasn't lost on me. In fact, when Brandon's app launched 6 months after my graduation, my parents celebrated with a family dinner at an expensive restaurant. When I got my job offer, I treated myself to take out Chinese food, alone, in my dorm room. Moving to Chicago felt like stepping into a new life. Matthew had also found a position with an engineering firm in the city, and we got a small apartment together in Lincoln Park. For the first time, I was building something that was entirely mine, with someone who valued me exactly as I was. My first year at Hartman was intense but rewarding. I was the first to arrive at the office and the last to leave, volunteering for challenging projects and working weekends to prove myself. Unlike in my family, where hard work was either ignored or expected, my colleagues and supervisors at Hartman noticed and appreciated my dedication. Richardson, I've never seen a junior architect with your work ethic. My supervisor, Janet, told me after I'd completed a complex environmental impact assessment ahead of schedule. Keep this up and you'll be leading your own projects within 2 years. Meanwhile, news from home was troubling. Brandon's sports training app, which my parents had helped fund with $15,000 from their savings, was struggling to gain users. The interface was poorly designed, the business model was unclear, and Brandon had apparently spent more money on flashy marketing than on actual development. During one of our Raider phone calls, my mother mentioned casually, "Brandon's having some challenges with his app, but these things take time. Building a business isn't easy." "How much money has he borrowed so far?" I asked, genuinely concerned about their financial situation. "That's not really your concern, Amanda," my father interjected, apparently listening in on another phone. "We're handling it as a family." The dismissal stung. I was family too, but apparently only when it came to being excluded from financial decisions, not included in them. 6 months later, the app officially failed. Brandon had burned through their initial investment and racked up additional credit card debt trying to keep it afloat. Instead of acknowledging the failure or holding him accountable, my parents immediately began planning their next move to help him. "He learned so much from this experience," my mother told me during a strained Sunday phone call. "His next idea is even better. He wants to start a chain of specialized fitness centers." I couldn't hide my concern. "Mom, maybe Brandon should get a regular job for a while, build up some savings, learn about business management before jumping into another venture." "Not everyone needs to play it safe like you do, Amanda. Some people are willing to take risks to achieve their dreams." The implication was clear. I was playing it safe by working hard and building a stable career, while Brandon was brave for repeatedly failing at poorly planned ventures that my parents funded. During this time, my career was flourishing. I was promoted to junior project manager within 18 months, leading a team on a sustainable housing development that would later win a regional design award. I was featured in a trade publication as one of 30 under 30 rising stars in green architecture. When I called to share the news about the award, my mother's response was lukewarm. "That's nice, dear. Speaking of work, do you know anyone in Chicago who might be interested in investing in fitness centers? Brandon is looking for business partners." I hung up feeling the familiar cocktail of hurt and frustration. Even my professional achievements were viewed primarily as resources for Brandon's benefit. Matthew witnessed these interactions and grew increasingly protective of me. "Amanda, you don't owe them anything," he said after a particularly difficult call where my parents had asked if I could co-sign a business loan for Brandon. "You've built this amazing career entirely on your own. Why should you risk that for someone who's never had to face consequences for his mistakes?" I knew he was right, but the guilt was overwhelming. I had been conditioned my entire life to believe that good daughters support their families, even when that support only flowed in one direction. Brandon's fitness center venture lasted 14 months. He opened 2 locations with my parents' financial backing, including a loan they co-signed using their house as collateral. The centers were in poor locations, overpriced for their markets, and Brandon had no experience in business management or the fitness industry. When the businesses failed, my parents lost $35,000 and were on the hook for a loan that would take them years to pay off. I learned about the extent of their financial distress through my cousin Rachel, who called me in tears. "Amanda, I'm worried about your parents. They look exhausted all the time, and I heard them arguing about money at Thanksgiving. Your mom mentioned they might have to refinance their house." That evening, I called my parents directly. "I heard about the fitness centers," I said gently. "Are you okay financially?" "We're managing," my father replied stiffly. "Brandon learned a lot from this experience. His next idea is even better." I felt my heart sink. There was going to be a next idea. They hadn't learned anything from losing $35,000 and risking their home. They were already planning to do it again. "Dad, maybe this would be a good time for Brandon to get a steady job and for you both to rebuild your savings," I suggested carefully. "Amanda, your brother is an entrepreneur. Not everyone is content working for someone else their entire life. Some people have bigger dreams." The subtle dig at my career choice was unmistakable.
In their minds, Brandon's repeated failures were evidence of his ambition, while my success was evidence of my lack of vision. Around this time, Matthew and I had been dating for 3 years, and our relationship was growing stronger. We talked about marriage, about the future we wanted to build together. His family had welcomed me completely, treating me like a daughter from the beginning. The contrast became especially stark during holidays. At Matthew's family gatherings, I was included in conversations, asked for my opinions, and celebrated for my achievements. At my own family gatherings, I felt like a guest who was tolerated but not particularly welcome. During Christmas dinner at my parents' house, Brandon announced his third business idea, a sports nutrition supplement line. My parents were immediately enthusiastic, despite having just lost $35,000 on their previous venture. "This time is different," Brandon explained confidently. "I've done market research. I've identified gaps in the current supplement market. I just need initial capital to get the manufacturing and distribution set up." I watched my parents' faces light up with renewed hope and felt a sense of dread. They were about to make the same mistake for the third time, and this time, they might lose everything. That night, Matthew found me crying in my childhood bedroom. "They're going to mortgage the house," I whispered. "I can see it in their eyes. They're going to risk everything for him again." "You can't save them from themselves," he said gently, holding me while I sobbed. "You can only control your own choices." 2 weeks later, my worst fears were confirmed. My parents had indeed mortgaged their house to fund Brandon's supplement business, borrowing against their home equity to provide him with $50,000 in startup capital.
As I prepared to enter my 4th year at Hartman & Associates, I had built a reputation as one of the firm's most dedicated and innovative architects. My sustainable housing project had not only won awards, but had also attracted attention from city planners looking to implement similar developments across Chicago. I was being invited to speak at conferences and had been featured in Architectural Digest as an emerging voice in green design. The morning that would change everything started like any other. I was reviewing blueprints for a new eco-friendly office complex when Janet knocked on my office door. "Amanda, can you come to the conference room? The partners want to see you." My heart raced as I walked down the hallway. Being called to meet with the partners could mean anything: a new project, feedback on current work, or potentially something bigger. When I entered the room, all 5 senior partners were seated around the table, smiling. "Amanda," said Robert Hartman, the firm's founder, "we've been watching your work closely over the past 3 years. Your dedication, innovation, and leadership have been exceptional. We'd like to offer you a promotion to senior associate." I felt my knees go weak. Senior associate was a position typically reserved for architects with 7 to 10 years of experience. At 26, I would be the youngest person ever to hold that title at the firm. "This comes with a significant salary increase, your own team of junior architects, and the opportunity to lead major projects from conception to completion," Janet added. "You've earned this, Amanda." That evening, I called Matthew first, barely able to contain my excitement. "I got it," I said as soon as he answered. "Senior associate. I can't believe it actually happened." "I can believe it," he said, and I could hear the pride in his voice. "You've worked harder than anyone I know. This is just the beginning." Then came the moment I had been dreading, but knew I had to face. I called my parents to share the news. "Hello, Amanda," my mother answered, sounding distracted. "How are things?" "Actually, I have some great news. I got promoted to senior associate at my firm. It's a huge honor. I'm the youngest person they've ever promoted to this level." There was a pause. "Oh, that's nice, dear," my mother replied flatly. "Listen, I'm glad you called. We need to talk about Brandon's business. He's having some cash flow issues and wondered if you might be able to help." My heart sunk. Even this moment, this achievement I had worked years for, was immediately overshadowed by Brandon's needs. "Mom, did you hear what I said? I just got promoted to senior associate. This is a major milestone in my career." Yes, congratulations," she said dismissively. "But Brandon really needs family support right now. His supplement business is going through growing pains, and we were wondering if you could loan him $10,000 to cover some manufacturing costs."
I sat in stunned silence. My parents had just mortgaged their house to give Brandon $50,000, and now they wanted me to contribute another $10,000. Meanwhile, my career achievement was treated as an afterthought. "I'm not giving Brandon $10,000, I said firmly. "Mom, you and Dad just took out a second mortgage for his business. How is he already short on cash?" "Things move quickly in business, Amanda." My father's voice joined the call. "Brandon identified an opportunity to expand into protein powders, but he needs additional capital. As his sister, we thought you'd want to help." "As his sister, I want him to succeed on his own merit. I'm not funding another business venture that hasn't been properly planned." The conversation ended uncomfortably, with my parents expressing disappointment in my selfishness and me feeling hurt that my major career milestone had been completely overshadowed. A week later, Matthew suggested we take a weekend trip to Lake Michigan. We had been together for 4 years now, and I had grown to love our quiet getaways where we could disconnect from work stress and family drama. On Saturday evening, Matthew suggested we watch the sunset from the beach. As we walked along the shoreline, he seemed nervous, checking his pocket repeatedly and stumbling over his words when I asked about his day. When we reached a secluded spot overlooking the water, Matthew stopped walking and turned to face me. "Amanda," he began, his voice shaking slightly, "these past 4 years with you have been the best of my life. You're the strongest, most determined person I know, and I want to spend the rest of my life supporting your dreams the way you've supported mine." He dropped to one knee and pulled out a ring box. "Will you marry me?" The ring was perfect. A simple, elegant solitaire that reflected my taste exactly. As he slipped it onto my finger, I felt overwhelmed with joy and relief. Here was someone who truly saw me, who valued my ambitions, who wanted to build a life where we both could thrive. "Yes," I whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." We spent that evening planning our future, talking about the kind of wedding we wanted, the life we would build together. Matthew's family had always made me feel welcome, and I knew that marrying him meant joining a family where I would be truly valued. When we returned to Chicago, I called my grandmother Patricia first to share the news. Her joy was immediate and genuine. "Oh, Amanda, my dear girl," she said through happy tears. "Matthew is wonderful, and he sees what I've always seen in you. I couldn't be happier." Calling my parents was a different experience entirely. When I told them about the engagement, my mother's response was practical rather than emotional. "How much did the ring cost? Have you set a date? I hope you're not planning anything too expensive." My father's contribution was equally lukewarm. "Matthew seems like a good enough guy. Just make sure you both have stable jobs before you start planning a big wedding." There was no excitement, no questions about how he proposed, no interest in my happiness, just practical concerns and faint approval. The contrast became even starker 2 weeks later when we had dinner with Matthew's family to celebrate our engagement. Susan had prepared my favorite meal and Richard had bought champagne. They wanted to hear every detail about the proposal, and they immediately began talking about how excited they were to officially welcome me into their family. "We've always thought of you as our daughter anyway. Now it's just going to be official," Susan said warmly. Sitting at their dinner table, surrounded by genuine love and excitement, I felt a bittersweet happiness. This was what family support looked like. This is how people who loved you responded to your joy. Around the same time, troubling news about Brandon's supplement business began to surface. My cousin Rachel mentioned that she'd seen him working at a local gym, teaching fitness classes. When I asked my mother about it, she became defensive. "He's just doing some consulting work while the business gets established. It takes time to build distribution networks for supplements." But I knew from my own research into the industry that Brandon had entered an oversaturated market with no unique selling proposition and no experience in nutrition or manufacturing. His supplements were generic products with fancy labels priced higher than established brands with no added value. 3 months after the engagement, the inevitable happened. Brandon's supplement business collapsed completely. He had managed to sell only a fraction of his initial inventory, and the manufacturing costs had eaten up most of his capital. My parents lost the $50,000 they had invested, and now they were responsible for a home equity loan that would take them 15 years to pay off. Instead of finally holding Brandon accountable, my parents' response was to circle the wagons and protect him from criticism. When I gently suggested that perhaps Brandon should consider getting a traditional job to help pay back some of the money, my mother became angry. "Your brother took a risk that didn't work out. That doesn't make him a failure. It makes him an entrepreneur who learned valuable lessons." "Mom, this is his third failed business. You and Dad have now lost over $100,000 supporting ventures that were doomed from the start. When does accountability enter the picture?" "Not everyone can be content with a safe, boring job like yours, Amanda. Brandon has vision and ambition." The insult to my career stung, but it also clarified something important. In my parents' minds, my success would always be diminished to make Brandon's failures seem acceptable. They couldn't acknowledge his pattern of poor decisions without admitting their own enabling behavior. That night, Matthew found me crying in our bathroom. "They'll never see me," I sobbed. "I could cure cancer, win a Nobel Prize, design the most beautiful building in the world, and they'd still find a way to make it about Brandon." "Then stop trying to get their approval," he said gently. "You don't need it anymore. We're building our own family now where both of us will be valued and supported." As I looked at my engagement ring, I realized he was right. I had been chasing validation from people who were incapable of giving it. It was time to focus on the family I was choosing, rather than the one I had been born into.
Matthew and I decided on a year-long engagement, setting our wedding date for the following June. We chose a beautiful botanical garden venue in Chicago, a place that combined my love of architecture with natural elements. As two working professionals with good salaries and no debt, we were fortunate to be able to plan and pay for the entire wedding ourselves. The venue was everything I had dreamed of. Glass conservatories filled with exotic plants, manicured gardens with stone pathways, and a ceremony space beneath an ancient oak tree. When Matthew and I toured it for the first time, I knew immediately it was perfect. "This is it," I told him as we stood in the main conservatory, sunlight streaming through the glass ceiling. "I can see us getting married here." "Then this is where we'll get married," he replied simply, squeezing my hand. Initially, my mother showed little interest in the wedding planning. When I invited her to come dress shopping, she had a scheduling conflict with one of Brandon's job interviews. When I asked for her input on invitations, she responded with a cursory, "Whatever you like is fine, dear." I had expected this detachment and had made peace with planning most of the wedding with Matthew's mother, Susan, who was thrilled to be involved. Susan and I spent weekends touring florists, tasting cakes, and discussing color schemes. She treated every decision as important and exciting, making me feel like a valued daughter rather than an afterthought. "I never had a daughter of my own," Susan confided as we looked at centerpiece options. "Planning this wedding with you is one of the happiest experiences I've had in years." Everything changed about 4 months before the wedding. Suddenly, my mother began calling daily with opinions about details she had previously shown no interest in. She criticized our choice of venue, saying it was too unconventional, and suggested we switch to her friend's country club instead, despite the fact that we had already paid a non-refundable deposit. "The garden is nice, Amanda," she said during one particularly frustrating call, "but it's not very traditional. And what if it rains? Have you thought about that?" "Yes, Mom, we have a rain contingency plan," I explained for the third time. "The garden has a glass conservatory that's absolutely stunning. We've already worked everything out with the coordinator." "Well, the country club has a beautiful indoor space, and my friend could get you a discount. It would be much more appropriate for a formal wedding." Next came the complaints about my dress, which she hadn't bothered to see until I showed her photos after purchasing it.
I had chosen a sleek, modern gown with clean lines and subtle beading, sophisticated and elegant, perfectly suited to both my style and our venue. "It's so simple," she said with disappointment. "I always pictured you in something more elaborate with a long train and lots of beading. This looks like something you'd wear to a business dinner." "This is the dress I love," I replied firmly. "It suits me and the venue perfectly." The strange part was that her sudden interest coincided with concerning news about my parents' financial situation. During a brief visit to their house to drop off save-the-date cards, I noticed past due bills on the counter and overheard my father on the phone with their bank discussing loan payments. Brandon had moved back into his childhood bedroom after his supplement business failed, and he was working part-time at a sporting goods store, his first real job since college. The irony wasn't lost on me that my parents were still supporting their 29-year-old son while criticizing my choice to build an independent life. As the wedding date approached, my parents' attempts to control the event intensified. My mother sent me a list of 20 additional guests she wanted to invite, most of whom were business associates of my father's that I had never met. "These are important connections for your father," she insisted, when I gently explained that we had already finalized our guest list and budget. "And they could be potential investors for Brandon's next business idea. It would be selfish not to include them." "This is our wedding, Mom," I reminded her, "not a networking event for Brandon." "Family weddings are always opportunities to strengthen business relationships," my father added, apparently listening on another phone. "You're being short-sighted." I was stunned by their attitude. They viewed my wedding day as a marketing opportunity for Brandon's future ventures, not as a celebration of Matthew and my love. The tension came to a head 6 weeks before the wedding, when my mother showed up unannounced at our apartment with a completely different set of floral arrangements than we had selected. "I took the liberty of changing the order," she announced proudly, spreading photos across our coffee table. "The florist is a friend of mine, and she agreed these arrangements would be much more appropriate. The ones you chose were so plain." I stared at the photos she presented, elaborate centerpieces with red roses and gold accents that clashed completely with our natural, organic green and white palette. They were gaudy and overwhelming. Everything our wedding was not supposed to be. "I can't use these," I said as calmly as possible. "They don't match anything else in the wedding. We've already paid for the original arrangements." "Well, I've already paid for these," she countered. "And frankly, Amanda, you should be grateful. My father and I are under tremendous financial strain right now with helping Brandon through this rough patch. The least you could do is appreciate when we try to contribute." That's when I lost my composure. "Contribute? You haven't contributed anything except criticism and complications. You ignored this wedding until suddenly deciding to take over. Where was this involvement when I was calling you for months asking for your input?" "Don't be dramatic," my mother said dismissively. "I'm just trying to help make your wedding day special." "By making it completely different from what Matthew and I want?" I retorted. "This is our day, not yours." The argument escalated until my father called, demanding to speak with me. "Your mother is in tears," he said accusingly. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you treat us? If you continue being this stubborn, we might not even attend the wedding." I was stunned into silence. The irony of his statement, "everything we've done for you," rang in my ears. What exactly had they done for me? They had ignored my achievements, dismissed my concerns, and were now trying to hijack my wedding. After composing myself, I responded, "Dad, I love you both, but this is my wedding. If you can't respect our choices, then maybe it would be better if you didn't attend." The phone call ended with my father hanging up on me. What followed was 2 weeks of strained silence, broken only by passive-aggressive texts from my mother about how family should come first and how disappointed she was in my attitude. During this time, Matthew's parents were incredible, stepping in to help with final arrangements and providing emotional support. "You deserve better than this," Susan whispered as she held me while I cried after a particularly difficult exchange with my family. "And you're allowed to set boundaries, even with your parents." The temporary estrangement was painful but clarifying. For the first time, I was standing firm in my decisions, refusing to be diminished or controlled. Matthew stood by me completely, never once suggesting I compromise to keep the peace. "This is our day," he reminded me, "and you've spent your entire life compromising for them. Not this time." During those 2 weeks of silence, I realized something important. I wasn't just planning a wedding, I was drawing a line in the sand. I was declaring that my happiness and my choices mattered, even if my parents couldn't see it. Just 1 month before the wedding, my parents reached out asking to meet for coffee. Hoping for reconciliation, I agreed to meet them at a neutral location, a cafe downtown where we wouldn't be overheard if things got emotional. What I didn't expect was the bombshell they were about to.
I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, my stomach churning with anxiety. Despite everything that had happened, part of me still hoped this meeting would lead to reconciliation. Maybe my parents had finally realized how hurtful their behavior had been. Maybe they were ready to support Matthew and me the way parents should. When they walked in, I immediately noticed how much older they looked. My father's hair had more gray, and there were deep lines around my mother's eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. They both moved with the weight of people carrying a heavy burden. "Thank you for meeting us," my mother said stiffly as they sat down across from me. "We know things have been tense." "I've missed talking to you both," I replied honestly. "I hope we can work this out." My father cleared his throat and got straight to the point. "We're in serious financial trouble," he announced without preamble. "Brandon's business it hasn't worked out as planned. We're at risk of losing the house." I felt a complex mix of emotions wash over me. Vindication that my concerns had been valid, alongside genuine worry for my parents' well-being. Despite everything, I didn't want them to lose their home. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "What exactly happened?" "The market just wasn't ready for his product," my mother explained defensively. "These things happen in business. The important thing is that Brandon learned valuable lessons from the experience." Even facing financial ruin, they were still making excuses for him. I bit my tongue and waited for them to continue. "The point is, we're going to need to make some changes, and we were hoping you would understand. We're 3 months behind on our mortgage payments, and the bank is threatening foreclosure." What followed was a stunning request that I could never have anticipated, even knowing how my parents operated. "We want you to downsize your wedding," my mother said, leaning forward earnestly. "Use the money you would save to help us with our mortgage payments. We've calculated that if you switched to a smaller venue, reduced the guest list, and simplified the reception, you could save at least $15,000. I sat there, coffee growing cold in my hands, trying to process the audacity of their request. They wanted me to sacrifice the wedding Matthew and I had saved for, planned for over a year, and were paying for entirely ourselves to bail them out of a financial crisis caused by their own poor decisions? "Let me get this straight," I said, finally, my voice carefully controlled. "You mortgaged your house for Brandon's business without consulting a financial advisor, despite my warnings. Now that it's failed, as I predicted it would, you want me to sacrifice the wedding Matthew and I have saved for and planned to bail you out?" "There's no need to be cruel about it," my mother sniffed. "Brandon took a risk that didn't pan out. It happens to many entrepreneurs. This is his 3rd failed business, Mom, and each time you've sacrificed your financial security to prop him up. I offered to review his business plan. I offered to connect you with financial advisors. You dismissed me every time." "We didn't come here to relitigate the past," my father said impatiently. "We came here because family helps family in times of need. We're asking for your help." "What you're asking is for me to cancel the wedding I've dreamed of so you can continue enabling Brandon's irresponsibility. I'm not doing that." My mother's face flushed with anger. "So you're saying no, just like that, after everything we've done for you?" There was that phrase again.
everything we've done for you." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "What exactly have you done for me? You paid for Brandon's college, but not mine. You funded his businesses, but never supported my career. You showed no interest in my wedding until now, when you want to use it to solve your financial problems. We raised you," my father said angrily. "We put a roof over your head, fed you, clothed you. Don't act like we never did anything for you. You did the bare minimum required by law. That's not the same as being supportive parents." The conversation deteriorated quickly from there. My parents alternated between guilt trips and accusations, painting me as a selfish daughter who was abandoning her family in their time of need. They brought up every perceived slight from my childhood, every time I had been difficult or ungrateful. "You've always been jealous of Brandon," my mother finally said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You can't stand that he's willing to take risks while you play it safe. Now you're punishing us because we supported his dreams." "I'm not punishing anyone," I said firmly. "I'm refusing to enable behavior that has already cost you your financial security. Matthew and I are not changing our wedding plans. We have contracts signed, deposits paid, and guests coming from across the country." "So that's it?" my father asked incredulously. "You're just going to let us lose our house?" "I'm happy to help you find financial counseling resources. I can connect you with advisors who can help you restructure your debt and create a realistic budget, but I will not sacrifice my wedding." My parents left shortly after, both visibly angry. As I watched them walk away, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with sadness. I had finally said no to them, and the world hadn't ended. That evening, I began receiving texts from extended family members. Apparently, my parents had shared a very one-sided version of events, painting me as a heartless daughter who was refusing to help her family in crisis. My Aunt Carol texted, "I can't believe you won't help your parents. Family comes first." My cousin Mike called, "Your parents are devastated. How can you be so selfish?" Even my grandmother Patricia received a visit from my mother, who tried to convince her to talk sense into me. But Grandma Patricia had always seen through my parents' favoritism. "Amanda," she said when she called me that night, "my mother came to see me today. She's very upset, but I told her the truth. You don't owe them your wedding day. You've given them enough." To make matters worse, I discovered through my cousin Rachel that my mother was planning to wear a cream-colored dress to the wedding, despite knowing it was inappropriate to wear anything resembling white to someone else's wedding. When I called to discuss it, she became defensive. "It's not white, it's cream, and it's the only formal dress I have that fits me right now, unless you expect me to spend money on a new dress when we're about to lose our house." The emotional manipulation was blatant, but I held firm. "Please find something else to wear, Mom. Any color other than white or cream would be fine. I don't understand why you're being so controlling about everything. It's just a dress. And it's just my wedding day, the one day that's supposed to be about Matthew and me." 2 weeks before the wedding, my parents showed up unannounced at our final venue walkthrough. Matthew and I were meeting with our wedding coordinator to confirm last-minute details when they appeared in the garden. "We thought we should be here for this," my mother announced, as if she had been involved in the planning all along. The coordinator looked at me in confusion. I had specifically told her that my parents weren't participating in the planning process. "Actually, we were thinking the ceremony would work better on the east lawn rather than by the oak tree," my mother continued, pointing to a completely different area of the garden. "And we'll need to add a table at the front for some special family friends." I took a deep breath before responding. "Mom, Dad, we didn't invite you to this meeting. The plans are finalized. There will be no changes." "We're still your parents," my father said sternly. "You don't speak to us that way." What followed was a tense confrontation in front of our very uncomfortable venue coordinator. It ended with my parents storming out, my father calling me an ungrateful daughter as they left. I broke down in tears as soon as they were gone, the weight of years of emotional neglect crashing down at once. The coordinator, a kind woman named Maria, handed me tissues and waited patiently while I composed myself. In 30 years of coordinating weddings, I've seen a lot of family drama, but your wedding is going to be beautiful, and you're marrying a man who clearly adores you. Don't let anyone take that joy away from you. That evening, Matthew found me crying in our bedroom, wondering if we should just elope and avoid the drama entirely. "This is exactly why we need to have this wedding exactly as we planned it," he said, firmly, sitting beside me and taking my hands. "Your entire life, they've made you feel small and unimportant. This day is about celebrating us and our love, surrounded by people who genuinely support us. We're not letting them take that away." His words gave me strength. He was right. This wedding wasn't just about getting married. It was about claiming my right to be celebrated and valued. I wasn't going to let my parents' dysfunction rob me of that.
Later that week, I was reviewing final vendor contracts when there was a knock at our apartment door. Matthew was at work, so I was surprised to find Brandon standing in the hallway when I opened it. He looked different than I'd seen him in years. Tired, humbled, and wearing the uniform from the sporting goods store where he now worked. "Hey, Amanda," he said awkwardly. "Can we talk?" I hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let him in. "Mom and Dad sent you to talk to me?" I guessed, as I reluctantly led him to our living room. "They don't know I'm here," he replied, surprising me. "Look, Amanda, things are really bad at home, really bad. Dad's talking about bankruptcy and Mom cries all the time. I know you said no to helping with the wedding money, but I thought maybe if I explained the situation." I crossed my arms and studied my brother's face. For the first time in our adult lives, he seemed genuinely vulnerable rather than entitled. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. "But I'm not canceling my wedding to bail them out, Brandon. That's not a reasonable expectation." He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "Why do you always have to be so difficult? Throughout our entire lives, you've been the problem child, always wanting things your way, never considering the family." His words stunned me into momentary silence before anger took over. "Are you serious right now? I'm the problem child? I worked my way through college while they paid for yours. I built my career from nothing while they funded business after business for you. I've never asked them for anything, Brandon, not a single thing." "That's not true," he argued. "You were always competing for attention, always trying to show me up with your grades and awards." "I was trying to be seen. Just once I wanted them to be as proud of me as they always were of you. Do you have any idea what it feels like to achieve something significant and have the people who should care the most barely acknowledge it? To watch them move mountains for your brother while you struggle alone?" Brandon looked genuinely confused by my outburst. "They gave you everything I had." "No, Brandon. They gave me nothing, and you had everything. That's the difference," I said, my voice breaking. "And now that their blind support of you has finally caught up with them financially, they expect me to sacrifice too. I won't do it. Not this time." For the first time in our conversation, Brandon seemed to really hear what I was saying. His defensive posture softened slightly. "I didn't realize." He started, then stopped. "Look, I know my businesses didn't work out, but I was trying to build something to be successful, like you." "Like me?" I laughed bitterly. "Brandon, I succeeded despite having no support. You failed despite having every advantage. Do you see the difference?" We sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. Finally, Brandon spoke again, his voice quieter. "The house thing is really serious, Amanda. They could lose it within 60 days if they don't catch up on payments." "That's heartbreaking," I said, and I meant it. "But it's also the natural consequence of their choices. They mortgaged their home for your business without proper due diligence. When I offered to help review your business plan, they dismissed me. When I suggested financial counseling, they ignored me. So what are they supposed to do now?" "Face reality," I replied firmly. "Brandon, you're 29 years old. You're living in your childhood bedroom, working part-time at a sporting goods store, and your parents are facing bankruptcy because they've funded 3 failed businesses for you. At what point do you take responsibility?" He flinched at my directness, but didn't argue. "They need to sell the house and downsize to something they can afford. You need to get a full-time job and contribute to household expenses. and all of you need to stop expecting other people to clean up the messes you create." Brandon stood up to leave, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation's direction. "You've changed, Amanda," he said as he headed toward the door. "I've grown up," I corrected him. "I've learned to value myself even when others don't. Maybe you should try it." After he left, I felt emotionally drained but also strangely liberated. I had finally had the honest conversation with Brandon that had been 30 years in the making. Whether he understood or not was beyond my control, but I had spoken my truth. The next morning, my phone rang before I was fully awake. It was my mother, and she was furious. "Brandon told me about your conversation yesterday. How dare you speak to your brother that way? He was trying to help us as a family, and you attacked him." "I told him the truth," I replied, still groggy from sleep. "The truth is that you've become selfish and cruel. You've forgotten where you came from and who helped you get where you are." I sat up in bed, fully awake now. "Who helped me get where I am? Please, enlighten me. Because from where I'm sitting, I got here entirely on my own. We raised you, we supported you. You provided basic necessities while lavishing attention and resources on Brandon. That's not the same thing as support. You've never talked to me like this before. We are your parents, and you owe us respect." "I do respect you," I said calmly. "But respect doesn't mean enabling destructive behavior, and it doesn't mean sacrificing my wedding to fix problems you created." "Fine," my mother said, her voice icy. "If that's how you want it, don't expect us to be there for you when you need us." "Mom, you've never been there for me when I needed you. Why would I expect that to change now?" She hung up on me. That afternoon, Matthew came home to find me stress cleaning our entire apartment. "Rough day?" he asked, taking the vacuum cleaner out of my hands and pulling me into a hug. "Brandon came by yesterday, then my mother called this morning. They're not going to change, are they? Even facing bankruptcy, they're still more concerned with protecting Brandon than acknowledging reality." "Probably not," Matthew said honestly. "But that's not your responsibility anymore. In 2 weeks, we're getting married and starting our own family. A family where both of us are valued and supported." "What if they don't come to the wedding?" I asked, voicing a fear I'd been carrying. "Then they'll miss out on one of the most beautiful days of your life," he replied. "And that will be their loss, not yours." The final week before the wedding passed in a blur of last-minute preparations. Susan helped me with final dress fittings, my grandmother Patricia flew in from Florida, and Matthew's family rallied around us with love and support. On Wednesday, 5 days before the wedding, I received an unexpected text from my father. "Your mother and I will be at the wedding. We may not agree with your choices, but we won't miss your wedding day." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling a complicated mix of relief and apprehension. Part of me was glad they would be there, but I also worried about what drama they might bring. "At least they'll be there," Matthew said when I showed him the text. "Whatever happens, we'll handle it together." On Friday, the day before the wedding, I was getting my nails done when my phone buzzed with a call from my cousin Rachel. "Amanda, I think you should know," she said nervously. "I ran into your parents at the grocery store yesterday. They were telling people that you refused to help them avoid foreclosure so you could have an expensive wedding. They're making you sound really selfish." I sighed, not entirely surprised. "Thanks for telling me, Rachel. I appreciate the heads up." "For what it's worth," she continued, "most people aren't buying it. Everyone knows how they've treated you over the years. Your grandmother Patricia has been setting the record straight." That evening at our rehearsal dinner, I was surrounded by people who genuinely loved and supported Matthew and I. His family had organized everything, creating a warm, intimate gathering at a restaurant overlooking the lake. As I looked around the table at our closest friends and family members, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. These were people who had chosen to be part of our lives, who celebrated our successes and supported us through challenges. My parents were notably absent from the rehearsal dinner, claiming they had other commitments. But their absence actually made the evening more peaceful and joyful. Susan stood up to give a toast, her eyes shining with tears. Tomorrow, Matthew is marrying the strongest, most determined woman I've ever met. Amanda, you've overcome so much to get to this point, and we couldn't be prouder to call you our daughter." As everyone raised their glasses, I felt a profound sense of belonging. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Unconditional love, genuine support, and celebration of each other's happiness. Tomorrow would be my wedding day, and regardless of whatever drama my parents might bring, I was ready to marry my best friend, surrounded by people who truly valued both of us.
My wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the June sunshine filtering through the trees of the botanical garden exactly as I had envisioned. I woke up in the bridal suite at a nearby hotel, surrounded by my bridesmaids, Sarah, Matthew's sister Emma, and 2 close friends from work. For the first time in weeks, I felt completely calm. "Are you nervous?" Sarah asked as she helped me into my wedding dress, the sleek, modern gown with subtle architectural details that perfectly reflected my aesthetic. "I'm not nervous about marrying Matthew," I replied honestly. "I'm nervous about seeing my parents, but I'm prepared for whatever happens." My grandmother, Patricia, had flown in from Florida and was staying in the room next door. She knocked softly and entered, her eyes immediately filling with tears when she saw me. "Oh, my beautiful granddaughter," she whispered, taking my hands in her weathered ones. "You look absolutely radiant." Susan arrived shortly after with a bouquet of white gardenias and eucalyptus, simple, elegant, and perfect for our garden setting. As my soon-to-be mother-in-law, she had been more involved in my wedding preparations than my own mother. "You look absolutely stunning, Amanda," Susan said, her voice thick with emotion. "I want you to know how proud we are to have you joining our family." Her sincere words brought tears to my eyes. This was what parental love was supposed to feel like: unconditional, supportive, and celebratory. 20 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, my parents arrived. I watched from the bridal suite window as they got out of their car, cutting it so close that I had begun to wonder if they would come at all. My mother had complied with my request not to wear cream, but had chosen a remarkably formal black gown that seemed designed to draw attention. My father looked uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo, his expression tense and unreadable. When they came to see me before the ceremony, our greeting was awkward. My mother offered a stiff hug while my father barely made eye contact. "The garden looks nice," my mother admitted reluctantly, though I still think the country club would have been more practical. I chose not to engage with the criticism. "Thank you both for coming," I said simply. "The ceremony will be starting soon." As I turned to leave for my final preparations, my mother grabbed my arm. "I noticed the seating chart has us in the 3rd row," she said accusingly. "Family should be in the front row." The front row is for people who have supported us throughout our relationship. Matthew's parents are there, along with my grandmother and my mentor from the firm. "We're your parents," my father interjected angrily. "Yes, you are. And you're seated in the 3rd row." I walked away before they could respond, feeling Matthew's hands slip into mine as I reached the garden's entrance. Despite the tense start, the ceremony itself was perfect. Walking down the aisle toward Matthew, seeing his face light up as he watched me approach, I felt the profound sense of rightness. This man had seen me at my most vulnerable and loved me unconditionally. The garden was transformed with twinkling lights strung through the trees, white flowers cascading from the ancient oak where we would exchange vows, and rows of wooden chairs filled with people who genuinely cared about our happiness. As we exchanged vows beneath the dappled sunlight filtering through the oak's branches, nothing else mattered. Matthew's voice was steady as he promised to support my dreams, celebrate my successes, and build a life where we both could thrive. When I spoke my vows, looking into his eyes, I felt the weight of my past lifting away. "Matthew, you saw me when I felt invisible, valued me when I felt worthless, and loved me when I couldn't love myself.
Today, I promise to build with you a family founded on respect, support, and unconditional love." The reception began beautifully in the glass conservatory, transformed with the elegant green and white decor we had chosen. Matthew and I shared our first dance to the song that had been playing the night he proposed, and for those magical moments, everything felt perfect. Our guests mingled happily, enjoying cocktails and hors d'oeuvres, while a string quartet played softly in the background. My grandmother Patricia was holding court at one table, showing photos of my childhood art projects to anyone who would listen. Matthew's family was warm and welcoming to everyone, creating exactly the atmosphere we had hoped for. Then came the speeches. Matthew's father gave a heartfelt welcome, sharing stories of how happy Matthew had been since meeting me and how delighted their family was to gain a daughter. My grandmother spoke next, her voice wavering with emotion as she told guests how proud she was of the woman I had become and how she had always known I would find someone worthy of my love. When my father took the microphone, I felt Matthew's hand tighten around mine. We had discussed the possibility that my parents might say something inappropriate, but I had hoped they would keep things brief and appropriate. My father cleared his throat awkwardly, looking around the room of elegant guests. "When Amanda was born," he began, her and my mother had such hopes for her. She was always independent, sometimes too independent for her own good." I felt my body tense at the backhanded compliment. "While she hasn't always made the choices we would have wished," he continued, "she has managed to do well for herself, and Matthew seems like a fine young man." The faint praise hung in the air, creating a palpable discomfort among our guests. Matthew's parents exchanged alarmed glances. But what came next shocked everyone into stunned silence. "Now, on a more serious note," my father said, his voice dropping conspiratorially, "our family is going through a difficult time financially. My son Brandon, Amanda's brother, took a brave entrepreneurial risk that unfortunately didn't succeed. As a result, my wife and I are in danger of losing our home." Audible gasps came from several guests. I sat frozen in my seat, unable to believe what was happening. "If anyone here is in a position to help out a family in need, we would be most grateful for any assistance during this challenging time." The room fell completely silent. I could hear the sound of silverware being set down on plates, the rustle of uncomfortable shifting in chairs. My father was using my wedding reception to solicit money from our guests. It was beyond inappropriate. It was beyond embarrassing. It was the final betrayal. In that moment of shocked silence, something shifted inside me. The lifetime of seeking approval, of accepting less than I deserved, of making myself small to avoid rocking the boat, all of it crystallized into perfect clarity. Without thinking, I stood up and walked toward my father, holding out my hand for the microphone. After a moment of hesitation, he handed it to me, perhaps thinking I was going to support his solicitation. "Thank you, Dad, for those unexpected remarks," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "I think this is a good opportunity to share some context with our friends and family who might be confused by what they just heard." I took a deep breath, looking around at the faces of our guests, many of whom I had known for years, others who were meeting me for the first time today. For as long as I can remember, there has been a pattern in my family. My brother Brandon has received unwavering support, both financially and emotionally, while I was expected to make my own way. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college, while my parents paid for my brother's education. I built my career without assistance, while they funded one failed business venture after another for him. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Brandon, seated at a table near the back, stood up as if to leave, then sat back down, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. I'm not sharing this to humiliate my family, I continued, my voice softening. I'm sharing it because today marks the end of a lifetime of seeking validation from people who have shown me repeatedly that they cannot give it. The room was completely silent now, every guest hanging on my words. Today, I'm choosing to surround myself with love and support, to build a new family with my husband, and to finally fully believe that I am enough exactly as I am. I turned to look directly at my parents. Mom, Dad, I love you. I always will. But I will no longer diminish myself to earn your approval. I hope someday we can build a healthier relationship, but that starts with honesty and respect, which is why I couldn't let Dad's speech go unanswered. Turning back to our guests, I raised my glass. To all of you who have truly supported us, who have celebrated our successes and comforted us in our struggles, thank you for being here today. Your presence means everything. I handed the microphone to Matthew, who had joined me at the front of the room. He took it, squeezing my hand in solidarity. I echo everything my wife said, he added simply, earning a gentle laugh from the crowd that broke some of the tension. Now, let's get back to celebrating. DJ, music, please.
As the music resumed and guests slowly made their way back to the dance floor, I watched my parents quietly gather their things and exit the reception. Their departure should have felt painful, but instead, I felt lighter than I had in years, as if I had finally put down a burden I had been carrying my entire life. Brandon followed shortly after, but not before stopping at our table. He looked directly at me, his expression unreadable. "That took guts," he said quietly, just loud enough for Matthew and me to hear. "I didn't realize. I never saw it the way you described it." Then he was gone, leaving Matthew and me to process what had just happened. "How do you feel?" Matthew asked, pulling me close as we stood watching our remaining guests. "Free," I replied honestly. "For the first time in my life, completely free." What happened next surprised me completely. Instead of awkward silence or mass exodus, our guests rallied around us with incredible warmth and support. Susan was the first to reach us, wrapping me in a tight hug. "I have never been prouder of anyone," she whispered in my ear. That took incredible courage. Matthew's father followed, shaking my hand firmly. "Welcome to our family, Amanda. We're honored to have someone with your strength and integrity as our daughter." Throughout the next hour, friends and family members approached us with similar messages. Many shared their own stories of family struggles, creating connections I had never expected. My college friend Jessica pulled me aside during dinner. "Amanda, I've watched you struggle with your family dynamics for years. What you did tonight was inspiring. My own parents have similar favoritism issues with my brother, and I've never had the courage to address it." One of Matthew's cousins, someone I barely knew, came up to our table. "I grew up in a similar situation. My parents always prioritized my sister. Watching you stand up for yourself tonight gives me hope that I can do the same someday." Even some of my father's business associates, the very people he had been hoping to solicit money from, sought me out to express their support. "I've known your father for 15 years, said Mr. Peterson, who owned a local insurance agency. "What he did tonight was completely inappropriate. You handled it with grace and dignity." My grandmother Patricia was beaming with pride as she held court at her table, telling anyone who would listen about my childhood achievements that my parents had overlooked. "That's my granddaughter," I heard her say to the couple seated next to her. "She's always been remarkable, even when others couldn't see it." The most surprising reaction came from some of my extended family members who had initially sided with my parents. My cousin Rachel, who had been texting me critically just weeks before, approached me during the father-daughter dance portion of the evening. "Amanda, I owe you an apology," she said, looking genuinely remorseful.
After tonight, I understand what you've been dealing with your whole life. What your dad did was inexcusable." As the evening progressed, I realized that my speech had accomplished something I never intended. It had given other people permission to acknowledge family dysfunction they had been ignoring or making excuses for. Several guests mentioned that they had noticed the favoritism in my family over the years, but had never felt comfortable addressing it. "We always wondered why your parents seemed so disinterested in your achievements," said Mrs. Patterson, our former neighbor. "It never made sense to us. You were such an accomplished young woman." The reception continued with genuine celebration and joy. Matthew and I danced under the stars in the garden, surrounded by twinkling lights and the laughter of people who truly cared about our happiness. During our last dance of the evening, Matthew pulled me close. "I'm so proud of you," he said softly. "You were magnificent tonight." "I couldn't have done it without you. Knowing I had your support gave me the strength to finally speak my truth." As we swayed together under the summer sky, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had spent 28 years trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it freely. Tonight, I had finally accepted that their limitations were not a reflection of my worth. The days following our wedding were surprisingly peaceful. Matthew and I departed for our honeymoon in Greece, spending 2 blissful weeks exploring ancient ruins and crystal-clear beaches, completely disconnected from family drama back home. When we returned to Chicago, I received several voicemails from extended family members. Most were expressing support after witnessing the wedding reception confrontation. My cousin Rachel called to tell me that my parents had become something of a pariah in their social circle after their behavior at the wedding. She said, "People are talking, not just about what happened at the wedding, but about how they've treated you over the years. I think a lot of people had noticed but never said anything. Now it's all out in the open." While I took no pleasure in my parents' social discomfort, there was a certain poetic justice to the situation. For once, they were experiencing the embarrassment they had often caused me. More significantly, I learned through Rachel that several of the business associates my father had tried to solicit at the wedding had actually reached out to each other afterward, comparing notes about his inappropriate behavior. His reputation in their professional circle had been damaged, potentially affecting his real estate business. "He really shot himself in the foot," Rachel explained. "Mr. Peterson told my dad that he was considering referring clients to your father's agency, but after the wedding, he's decided against it. He said he questions your father's judgment and professionalism." A month after the wedding, I received a stiff, formal email from my mother. She and my father wanted to meet to discuss recent events. After consulting with my therapist, I agreed to meet them at a neutral location.
I chose a restaurant halfway between our apartment and my parents' new place for our meeting. Matthew offered to come with me for support, but I decided this was something I needed to face alone. After months of therapy following the wedding, I felt emotionally prepared for whatever they might say. When my parents arrived, the change in them was striking. They looked older, more worn down, and there was a humility in their demeanor that I had never seen before. The financial stress and social fallout from the wedding had clearly taken its toll. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us," my mother began, her voice quieter than usual. "We know things have been difficult since the wedding. We wanted to clear the air," my father added, avoiding eye contact as he spoke. I waited silently for them to continue, having learned in therapy not to fill uncomfortable silences or make things easier for people who needed to take responsibility for their actions. "What you did at your wedding was very hurtful to us," my mother finally said. "We felt humiliated in front of everyone we know." "I spoke the truth," I replied calmly. "After a lifetime of being overlooked and undervalued, I finally stood up for myself." "But you humiliated us in front of everyone," my father protested. "Our friends, our business associates. Everyone was looking at us like we were monsters." "I'm sorry you felt humiliated," I said sincerely. "But I'm not sorry for what I said. Every word was true, and I would say it again. What followed was a tense but surprisingly productive conversation. For the first time in my life, I didn't back down or accept their version of events. When my mother claimed they had always supported me equally, I calmly listed specific instances when they had not. When my father suggested I was exaggerating the differences in how they treated Brandon and me, I provided concrete examples that he couldn't refute. You paid $80,000 for Brandon's college education and gave me $1,000. You funded 3 failed businesses for him while never once offering to help with my student loans. You mortgaged your house for his supplement company, but asked me to cancel my wedding to help pay your bills. We believed in Brandon's potential, my mother said defensively. And what about my potential? I graduated valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to Cornell, built a successful career, and you barely acknowledged any of it. Why was his potential worth investing in while mine was ignored? They had no answer for that. We did the best we could, my father finally said. We're not perfect parents. No, you're not, I agreed. But the issue isn't perfection. It's fairness, respect, and basic acknowledgement. I needed to feel valued by my own parents, and you couldn't give me that. As our conversation continued, something remarkable happened. My parents began to actually listen. When I explained how it felt to have my achievements overlooked while Brandon's failures were excused, my mother's eyes filled with tears. I didn't realize we made you feel that way, she whispered. Yes, you did, I said gently but firmly. On some level, you knew. I told you how I felt many times over the years. You chose not to hear it because it was easier to maintain the status quo. By the end of our meeting, my parents hadn't apologized for their behavior, but something had shifted. They couldn't deny the pattern I had described, and for the first time, they seemed to understand how their favoritism had affected me. What do you want from us now? My father asked, as we prepared to leave. I want honesty. I want acknowledgement of what happened without excuses or justifications. And I want a relationship built on mutual respect, not on my need for your approval. Would you be willing to see us again? My mother asked hesitantly. Yes, but there need to be boundaries. I won't tolerate being diminished or dismissed anymore. If you can respect that, then we can work on rebuilding our relationship. Over the following months, we began the slow, difficult process of creating a new dynamic. I suggested family therapy, and while my father declared it a waste of time and money, my mother agreed to attend sessions with me. Those therapy sessions were eye-opening. With a neutral mediator present, my mother began to acknowledge patterns she had previously denied. She admitted that Brandon had always been easier to support because his failures made her feel needed, while my successes made her feel unnecessary. I didn't realize how to be proud of you without feeling like I had nothing to offer, she confessed, during one particularly emotional session. Brandon needed me, but you seemed to have everything figured out. It was a breakthrough moment that helped me understand their behavior, even if it didn't excuse it. As the 1-year anniversary of our wedding approached, Matthew and I received wonderful news. We were expecting our first child. The pregnancy brought a whirlwind of emotions and forced me to confront my fears about parenthood. I'm terrified of making the same mistakes they made, I confessed to Matthew one evening, as we assembled a crib in what would become the nursery. That will never happen, he assured me, his hand resting protectively over my growing belly. When you saw no ad, you sat for sure what not to do. Plus, I'll be right here with you, making sure we both get it right. When we shared the news with our families, the reactions were telling. Matthew's parents were ecstatic, immediately offering support and expressing their joy at becoming grandparents. My own parents' response was more complicated. My mother responded with genuine happiness, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Oh, Amanda, a baby! I'm so excited for you both!" My father's response was more reserved, but warmer than I had expected. "Congratulations," he said,
and for the first time in years, he seemed to mean it. Brandon's response surprised me most of all. "I'm going to be the best uncle ever," he declared when I told him over coffee. "This kid is going to know they're amazing from day one." There was a sadness behind his words, an acknowledgement of what we had both missed in our own childhoods, and a determination to do better for the next generation. As I write the story, I'm 7 months pregnant and preparing to become a mother myself. The journey of healing with my family continues. Some days are easier than others. There are still moments when my mother makes a thoughtless comment that stings, or when my father compares me unfavorably to Brandon out of habit. The difference now is that I no longer internalize these moments as reflections of my worth. I can name them for what they are, set appropriate boundaries, and move forward without carrying the weight of their expectations. Brandon has continued to grow and change. He's been promoted to assistant manager at his job and is dating someone who challenges him to be better. He recently told me that he's grateful for my wedding speech because it forced him to confront his own role in our family's dysfunction. I was 30 years old and still living like a teenager. Your speech was a wake-up call I desperately needed. Most importantly, I've learned that worthiness isn't something to be earned through achievements or conformity. It's inherent, unchangeable, present from birth. My child will never have to wonder if they're enough. They will never have to compete for attention or validation. They will be loved completely for exactly who they are. The botanical garden where Matthew and I were married has become a special place for us. We return there on anniversaries and special occasions, walking the same paths where we promised to love and support each other unconditionally. If my story resonates with anyone watching, please know that your worth isn't determined by other people's ability to see it. You are enough exactly as you are. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. Speaking your truth isn't cruel, it's courageous. And sometimes standing up for yourself is the greatest act of self-love you can perform. The family we choose can be just as important as the family we're born into. Choose wisely, love deeply, and never forget your inherent worth. Thank you for listening to my story. If you made it this far, please hit that like button and subscribe to Revengenius. Share in the comments below about a boundary you set that changed your life for the better. How did you learn to value yourself when others wouldn't? Your story might help someone else who was once in your shoes. Remember, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's living well and refusing to let anyone make you feel small ever again.